Hey guys, tonight we sail back into the 13th century, to a world where dust kicks up from the hooves of 1,000 tired horses, where men in wind-whipped cloaks carry sealed scrolls across endless stretches of steppe, desert, and mountain. A world where yurts, yes, those round, felt-lined tents, weren't just for sleeping, but for sorting, dispatching, and keeping a sprawling empire stitched together through the power of organized paperwork. You are not a mighty warrior or a fearsome chieftain in this tale. You're a courier on the Yam. You probably won't survive this. Not because of some dramatic death in battle, but because you haven't eaten in 12 hours, your horse smells worse than fermented goat milk, and your scroll pouch just got soaked in a river you were pretty sure you could cross on foot. You're lost, slightly sunburned, and one wrong detour could take you straight into a marsh full of mosquitoes roughly the size of hawks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is, especially if you're already tucked under the blankets. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start at the edge of the Mongol Empire, where the grasslands still glisten with early dew and the sun has just begun to stretch its way across the blue bowl of the sky. Before you looms your first destination, a postal yurt. But this isn't some quaint nomadic camp. This one bristles with activity, horses snorting, riders shouting, and woolen tent flaps slapping in the breeze like impatient flags. As you approach, two men in layered riding cloaks, each marked with a tamga, the emblem of their clan, wave you forward. You flash your gerage, a bronze tablet engraved with authority from the Khan himself. It's warm from your chest where it's hung beneath your cloak, and heavy with importance. Mainstream historical fact: the Mongol Empire's Yam system was an extensive relay network of postal stations stretching thousands of miles across Asia. Riders carried military orders, diplomatic messages, and trade data at incredible speeds for the 13th century. Think of it as a medieval express delivery service, if your FedEx driver was on horseback and possibly armed. The yurt's interior surprises you. You expected mud and moths. Instead, the felt walls are lined with scroll racks, color-coded leather satchels, and hanging pouches marked in Uyghur script. A central brazier glows softly, steaming a pot of what might generously be called broth, or, less generously, mutton tea. This is not a place for lingering. You hand off a scroll. Well, your first scroll. You're still carrying 4 more. The station keeper doesn't ask questions. He logs your arrival with a notch on a wooden board, gives your horse a tired once-over, and gestures to a tethered gelding nearby. Fresh mount. No pleasantries. Fringe tidbit: some relay stations had prearranged food and drink laid out in rows for incoming messengers, including air-dried cheese called curate, fermented mare's milk, arag, and dried mutton slices. Most of it was so salty or sour that it doubled as a natural stimulant, sort of like medieval energy bars you had to chew with both hands and a prayer. As you gallop off on the new horse, this one faster, moodier, and far more likely to try biting your kneecap, you see the system at work. Another rider gallops past in the opposite direction. His cloak flares behind him like a black flag. He doesn't look at you. No need. You're 2 threads in the same vast web. There's no room for ego in the Yam. Only speed, stamina, and survival. Historians still argue whether this postal system should be considered the world's first true, state-controlled logistics network or simply an evolution of older relay systems like the Persian Angarium. But most agree, no one did it with quite the ruthless efficiency of the Mongols. You adjust your pouch, tucking it tighter against your side as wind rises over the plains. Each hoofbeat feels like a drum. Each station brings you closer to your destination, but also deeper into the strange rhythm of a courier's life. You'll sleep when the scrolls stop. Spoiler: they never do. You've been riding for what feels like years, though your body tells you it's only been 3 days. Your legs ache in places you didn't know had muscles, and you're starting to develop a deep suspicion that your new horse is plotting your downfall. Its name might be Storm, but you're fairly certain it translates to demon with hooves in the local dialect. The steppes roll endlessly around you, tall grasses brushing against your stirrups. Somewhere far to the east, behind a haze of clouds, the mountains loom. That's where you're headed. Or rather, that's where the next relay yurt waits, perched at the base of a pass so steep your toenails curl just thinking about it. But for now, you're focused on the ground in front of you and the thin strip of rutted dirt that marks the route of the Yam. Let's talk about that route, because it didn't happen by accident. Mainstream historical fact: the Mongol postal system operated along the Yam roads, carefully laid out routes that spanned over 25,000 miles of territory. At intervals of roughly 20 to 40 miles, depending on terrain, you'd find relay stations called ortage or jamchi huts. These weren't optional. They were the arteries of empire, and riders like you were the lifeblood pumping through them. What you start to notice: Once you've stopped fantasizing about eating something that isn't made of mutton, is how perfectly spaced everything is. Even out here, where you half expect to be eaten by a very lost bear, the Mongol logistical mind shines through. Each postal yurt sits within a day's hard ride of the next. Not a lazy, might arrive by dusk, kind of ride. More like, hope you packed salt tablets and said goodbye to your knees, kind of ride. And at each one, you're expected to switch horses. Not out of luxury. Out of brutal necessity. Fringe tidbit. Some historical accounts suggest the Mongols trained horses specifically for postal duty, sleek, wiry creatures bred for speed and endurance. They weren't pampered, but they were essential. Losing a courier horse could be punished just as harshly as losing a message. Which is awkward, because Storm just stumbled slightly and you're wondering if now's a good time to pretend you're someone else. Storm recovers. You both live another hour. As you pass through a narrow gorge, wind howls between the rocks and rattles the tin seal on your scroll tube. It's a sharp, metallic sound, like a bell you didn't mean to ring. You glance up. Falcons. 2 of them circle above you. You've seen them before. They often hover around relay stations. Not because they deliver messages, though, let's admit, that would be cool, but because the scraps of meat left behind are just too tempting to resist. Historians still argue whether all the routes of the Yam were plotted solely by Mongol minds, or if they incorporated older Silk Road trails, especially along the western edges of the empire. Some scholars point to markers reused from Tang-era China. Others claim the speed and efficiency could only have come from scratch planning. You, of course, have no time to debate it. You're busy holding your cloak shut against a biting gust of wind and praying that Storm doesn't throw a tantrum mid-slope. But still, you notice things. Like how some yurts are built with reinforced walls, wrapped in extra felt or layers of hide. Probably to survive the winter gales. Others are more open, with wide flaps and shaded awnings, likely adapted for the desert heat. You even heard a rumor at the last station that one yurt near the Gobi had a tiled stove. That sounded made up, but now you're kind of hoping it's true. Your next destination appears suddenly, like it was waiting just out of sight. A small rise in the earth reveals a cluster of yurts, several low stone circles for fire, and the silvery shapes of tethered horses glinting in the late afternoon sun. You squint. Is that smoke? Yes. Someone's brewing tea. You could cry. Except you don't. Because you're a professional courier of the Yam. Instead, you ride in at a dignified trot, dismount with only one leg cramping, and present your scroll to a sleepy-eyed attendant in a hat 3 sizes too big. He nods slowly, then gestures toward the food circle. A hard biscuit. A gourd of slightly fermented mare's milk. You eat like it's a royal feast. The next scroll goes out. A fresh horse is brought. Storm gives you one last glare as he's led away. Honestly, you'll miss the little monster. Your new mount is smaller, leaner, and, mercifully, less homicidal than Storm. You name him Twig, mostly because he looks like he's made of sticks and prayer. Twig's gait is smooth, if a little erratic, like he's navigating the landscape based on secret horse instincts instead of logic. Still, you're moving again, and that's all that matters. Ahead, the land starts to shift. The grassy plains give way to a drier, rock-strewn scrubland. The air smells different now, like dust and sunburnt sage. The road underhoof is flatter, more worn, and littered with the occasional hoofprint, lost sandal, or suspiciously shiny rock that you're pretty sure is just quartz and not treasure. You check anyway. It's not treasure. You pass 2 more couriers heading east. Both look exactly like you, dust-caked, slightly desperate, carrying more responsibility than any one person should reasonably be trusted with. You nod as you pass, a silent yep, still alive acknowledgement that binds all Yam riders together. Mainstream historical fact, the courier network wasn't just for Mongols. Under Genghis Khan and his successors, trusted foreigners, especially Persian and Chinese bureaucrats, Uyghur scribes, and even European envoys, were granted access to the Yam routes using gerrage passes. This turned the empire into a literal highway of diplomacy, espionage, and trade. Marco Polo likely used this system during his journey to Kublai Khan's court. But make no mistake, this was a privilege. The gerrage wasn't a trinket, it was the key to movement. Without it, you were just another traveler. With it, doors opened, horses changed, and hot tea occasionally showed up exactly when you needed it. Speaking of tea, you pull into a yurt at the edge of a salt flat and are immediately handed a bowl of warm liquid that smells like boiled goat and wet wool. It's not tea. It's arag again. Fermented mare's milk. The taste has not grown on you. The keeper here is an older woman with hands like bark and a hat shaped vaguely like a mushroom. She doesn't ask your name, but she does tug your sleeve and mutter something that sounds like, horse too skinny. You glance at Twig. He bristles. She slaps a pouch of dried fruit into your hand and points to a wooden stool. You sit. There is no arguing with her. Fringe tidbit. Some Mongol postal yurts doubled as intelligence hubs. Messengers carried coded language or oral reports in addition to written scrolls. Certain elders, especially women, held positions as information sifters, organizing not just the physical messages but the gossip, rumors, and verbal updates carried from station to station. Think of it as history's coziest surveillance state. As you eat your fruit, which turns out to be sun-dried melon and something you hope is apple, you listen. The woman is mumbling to another rider, this one headed north. You catch snippets: snow early in the passes, a bandit attack near the Orkhon Valley, and something about a missing nobleman's falcon. You file it all away. You don't need it. But then again you might. Historians still argue whether couriers like you were expected to memorize routes and reports as backup, or if this was simply a side effect of the job. Some accounts from Chinese and Persian sources suggest that experienced messengers carried just as much information in their heads as in their scroll tubes. You're starting to believe it. As you saddle up again, you realize you've begun to move on instinct. You know how far your current horse will run before tiring. You can feel the wind shift and predict whether the next station is nestled in a valley or perched on a ridge. You've stopped flinching at the sound of galloping hooves behind you. You are the message now. The next stretch is quiet. Just you and Twig and the wind. Your thoughts start to wander, not forward, but backward. You remember your first scroll. How you held it with both hands like it might explode. Now, they're just weight on your hip. You don't even read them. That's not your job. Your job is to ride. You crest a hill. Below, the next yurt waits, smoke curling gently into the air. You swear it smells like broth and fresh horse dung. 2 riders are already there, crouched beside the fire. One of them waves. You wave back. You don't know each other. But out here, that's enough. You don't dismount right away. You sit there for a moment, Twig shifting beneath you, the yurt down below puffing smoke into the blue-gold dusk. Something about this moment feels earned. You're tired, but it's the good kind of tired. The kind that says you've covered distance, literal and metaphorical. Then you remember your saddle's been cutting into your thigh for the last hour and that if you don't dismount soon, your legs will give out mid-step and you'll crumple like a dropped sack of millet. So you swing your leg over, more or less gracefully, and lead Twig the rest of the way down the slope. Inside, it's warm and dim. The smell is half sour milk, half something roasting over coals, maybe lamb, maybe horse. You don't ask. A thick-armed man with a beard braided in 3 directions takes your scroll tube, barely glancing at it before placing it in a wooden box beside the hearth. You wait. This part always takes a minute. Mainstream historical fact: Mongol relay stations weren't just roadside pit stops, they were logistical command centers. Messages didn't always continue immediately. Some were copied, redirected, or delayed based on priority and urgency. Each yurt had a designated Yamchi, station master, responsible for tracking arrivals and ensuring messages stayed secure. Many of these individuals were from noble families, which added a layer of accountability, and probably a dash of passive-aggressive condescension when you arrived late. Your station master tonight appears more brawn than bureaucracy, but the logbook beside him tells another story, pages filled with cramped, looping script in at least 3 languages. You glance at it and spot symbols you don't recognize. Secret codes. Clan markings. One looks suspiciously like a camel's backside. You suppress a laugh. The man gestures to a pile of blankets and jerks his thumb toward a pot. This is what counts for room service in the Mongol Empire, and frankly, it's not bad. Fringe tidbit: some postal yurts had unique identification features, not just for humans, but for birds. Pigeons and hawks were trained to return to specific stations, especially in high-altitude areas where horse travel became risky. These birds often wore colored cords or bells, and there's at least one dubious report of a falcon delivering a cheese sample from Khotan to Karakoram. You ponder this as you slurp soup and watch a pigeon fight a beetle near the fire. Sleep is fitful, but it's sleep. You wake before dawn, because you always do now. Your body has developed its own internal yam clock. Before the fire is stoked, before anyone else stirs, you're outside with Twig, brushing off the night dew and checking his hooves for pebbles. He tolerates you, which, in horse language, means he loves you deeply. You don't linger. As you ride westward, the sky shifts from plum to pearl to gold. You pass a stone cairn marked with a carved symbol, 2 interlocking rings, chipped and worn. You remember an elder saying that this marked the border between 2 tribal territories, though no one patrols it anymore. The Empire has unified too much land for anyone to enforce those borders now. Still, the symbols remain. like echoes of things that mattered before you were born. Historians still argue whether the relay system made Mongol conquest possible, or if it was the conquest that necessitated the system. Was the yam a cause or an effect? A prelude to dominance or a byproduct of it? You think about this as you ride, but the road doesn't answer. It just stretches ahead, wide and worn, like a promise you never quite finish hearing. You encounter a merchant caravan coming the other way, a dozen camels, a few oxen, and what looks like a very anxious sheep strapped to a sled. The leader shouts a greeting in Turkic. You shout back in a blend of Mongol and polite exhaustion. He tosses you a walnut. You nod. It's the closest you'll get to a hug this week. A few hours later, the air thickens with the scent of salt and smoke. You hear the yipping of dogs, the low murmur of conversation, and the unmistakable creak of saddle leather. Another station. You don't bother asking what's for lunch. It's fermented something, probably. You barely slow down this time. The scroll tube is passed hand to hand like a relay baton, your new gerrage stamped and handed off before your foot even hits the ground. The yurt keeper, a freckled boy no older than 12, grins wide as he presses a chunk of smoked meat into your palm and waves you onward like a general dispatching troops. You wave back with your meat hand. This is how it goes now. Fast stops, quicker mounts, fewer words. You and the system are in rhythm. It's not glamorous, but it works. And besides, you've discovered something strange out here, something almost meditative. You ride, and the world shrinks to the sound of hooves and wind. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongol relay system could move messages over 200 miles in a single day, a speed that stunned contemporary empires. Riders changed horses at regular intervals, often every 25 to 30 miles, allowing the message, not the messenger, to travel without rest. This was the yam's genius. It didn't rely on endurance so much as coordination. And coordination takes a village. Literally. At this station, there's more bustle. A smith is hammering a horseshoe near a yurt door. Children chase each other between tethered animals. A teenage girl is scrubbing a saddle with sand and something that smells suspiciously like sheep pee. You nod at her in solidarity. She doesn't nod back. Inside the yurt, you're briefly detained, not out of suspicion, but bureaucracy. The Yamchi here is precise, maybe even a little smug about it. He double-checks your gerrage, taps it on the rim of a copper bowl for luck, then logs your arrival in a thick ledger with a carved bone pen. You resist the urge to sneeze. The ink smells like vinegar and regret. Fringe tidbit. Some Mongol postal stations had custom stamps made from carved antler or burned clay, used to authenticate messages or prove arrival times. A few of these stamps still exist today, though many have strange symbols historians can't quite decipher. Were they family crests? Clan jokes? Or, as one scholar suggests, early forms of bureaucratic venting? Eventually, you're cleared to ride again. The new horse is a sturdy gray with a notched ear and a distinctly judgmental expression. You name him bureaucrat. You mount. You sigh. You ride. The scenery is changing now. Fewer grassy plains, more rocky ridges and sun-bleached outcroppings. Dust plumes rise in the distance, possibly from another rider, possibly from something larger and less predictable. You tighten your grip on the reins. A few hours in, you spot something odd, a wooden pole jammed into the ground, with a strip of red cloth fluttering from the top. You slow. This isn't a road marker. It's a warning. You dismount, letting bureaucrats sip from a shallow stream nearby. The fabric is stained and frayed, but unmistakable. It's a bandit marker. Not official, of course, but understood. A polite Mongol way of saying, hey, maybe don't ride this way if you enjoy staying alive. Historians still argue whether the yam was ever truly safe. Official records praise its efficiency and order, but personal accounts, when you can find them, tell of ambushes, feuds, and the occasional snow leopard with boundary issues. You've yet to see a snow leopard, but you're beginning to feel personally attacked by dust. You take the long route around. It adds half a day, but the sky is clear, and the air tastes faintly of mint from the wild herbs crushed beneath bureaucrats' hooves. You ride in silence for a while, broken only by the occasional squawk of a magpie or the unmistakable thwop of bureaucrat farting without shame. You pass a cairn marked with smooth stones and a piece of felt. Someone left a chunk of jerky on top, maybe as an offering, maybe as a snack. You don't touch it. The spirits are probably watching. As you crest the next hill, you spot your next destination, a large cluster of yurts surrounded by fencing. A proper way station, big enough to house a dozen riders, a goat herd, and, judging by the smell, a cheese operation of considerable ambition. You grin. Maybe tonight you'll get a real blanket. The scent hits you before the warmth does, a tangy, creamy waft of air that says someone nearby has been aggressively fermenting dairy. You breathe it in like it's incense. After days of dry winds and dust-covered mouthfuls of travel food, even pungent cheese smells like a comfort. You lead bureaucrat toward the central enclosure, nodding at a wiry woman tending a pot of what appears to be yogurt soup. She nods back without looking up, as if she already knows your route, your name, and the exact state of your knees. She's probably right. Inside the largest yurt, the walls are lined with bundles of fur, stringed instruments, and a few bronze bowls that catch the firelight. This is no ordinary station, it's one of the deluxe ones, a midpoint hub with enough traffic to support permanent staff and the occasional feast. You're barely through the felt flap when a boy offers you a ladle of salty tea and a steamed dumpling the size of your palm. You accept both. You are not a fool. Mainstream historical fact: major way stations along the Mongol Yam were sometimes used for more than message delivery. They acted as checkpoints, small courts, even emergency hospitals. Envoys traveling with diplomatic messages could rest here for several days. Marco Polo himself stayed at several such outposts, noting their cleanliness, their food, and how little he understood the language despite a month of trying. You sit cross-legged on a low cushion as an older man pokes at your boots with the curiosity of someone who once cobbled shoes and never quite got over it. He mumbles something about your stitching. You pretend to agree. He seems pleased. Then, like clockwork, comes the station's pet monkey. Fringe tidbit: one travel account from the 14th century describes a Mongol outpost where a macaque was kept as a sort of mascot. According to the report, the monkey was trained to alert the station master when a rider approached, though, given macaque's general nature, it's just as likely the creature screamed at everything. This detail is almost certainly apocryphal, but you swear you see something small and hairy dart across the yurt's entryway as the door flaps open. You look around. No monkey. Just a shaggy dog with more fleas than fur. He glares at you. You bow slightly. Respect. You don't have long to rest. Your gerrage is re-stamped with fresh sigils, each one slightly different depending on the station, and passed through a cracked leather pouch worn smooth from thousands of hands. The station master inspects your scroll tube with a reverence typically reserved for sacred relics or suspicious cheeses. He grunts, ties the leather back, and hands it off to a second rider with a fresh mount. And just like that, you're off duty, at least for a night. It's strange, this moment of stillness. You stretch your legs outside the yurt, sitting on a low stool fashioned from an upturned bucket and half a saddle. Overhead, the stars burst out of the sky like spilled millet, uncountable, sharp, alive. You think about how the relay system depends on people like you. Ordinary couriers, riding borrowed horses, braving wind and fatigue and occasional goat-related roadblocks. You don't wield swords or hold titles. But the whole empire would wobble without you. The messages you carry thread the land together. Orders, treaties, census tallies, food lists, family greetings, even the occasional coded insult between nobles pretending to be diplomatic. Historians still argue whether couriers held high status or were merely cogs in the Yam's machinery. Some were promoted to official ranks, others remained invisible, unnamed even in their death. But no matter their title, their work ran deeper than the roads they traveled. They were memory in motion. You lean back, sip your tea, and rub your sore ankle. The wind picks up, brushing your face with the crisp smell of snow somewhere far off. A goat bleats. The shaggy dog barks once, then curls beside the fire. Inside, a group of musicians begins plucking a morin kuur, a horsehead fiddle, its low, yawning tones bleeding through the canvas walls like a lullaby for the entire steppe. You listen without listening, the notes winding around your thoughts like smoke. Tomorrow, the road stretches on. More stations, more stamps, more moments of odd silence between bursts of conversation. But for tonight, you are still. You are fed, slightly less dusty, and entirely too full of fermented dairy to move quickly. You glance down at your hands, still stained with horse sweat and ink smudges. Then you lie back, arms behind your head, and let the stars tell the stories for once. Morning arrives in layers, first the cold, which wraps around your ankles like a soggy cat, then the sounds, distant hooves, someone coughing, the soft shush of canvas yurt flaps being rolled aside. Finally, the light, pale and bleary, like it's just woken up too and isn't thrilled about it. You stretch. Everything cracks. Someone nearby mutters, "Ow," in sympathy. Possibly you. A steaming bowl of something beige and vaguely porridge-like appears in your lap, offered by the same wiry woman from last night. You don't ask what it is. You just eat it. It's warm and mildly gritty, like breakfast and exfoliation all at once. The message isn't in your possession anymore. It's been passed forward, carried by another courier down the next stretch of Yam Road. But you've been assigned a return delivery. Not glamorous. Not urgent. But necessary. This one's lighter, just a carved wooden box containing medical herbs, a sealed pouch of tea, and a folded message addressed to a garrison hospital somewhere near the western frontier. Mainstream historical fact. In addition to state communications, the Mongol Yam system often transported practical supplies, medicine, dried food, tools, even rare plants requested by court physicians. Some stations doubled as herbal waypoints, where roots and dried stems were stored in case a passing courier had to deliver an emergency parcel to a sick noble or wounded soldier. It wasn't all espionage and edicts. Sometimes, the empire just needed more mint leaves. The horse you're given this time is younger, jumpy, with a dramatic tail flick and a nose that keeps trying to steal your sleeve. You name him Suspicion. As you ride out, you can feel the shift in the route. Fewer yurts. Longer stretches between stations. The air carries a sharper tang, like the wind is licking rocks and spitting them at you for fun. Around noon, you pass a ruin. Just a circle of stones and the remnants of a charred wooden frame. Someone's yurt, long gone. A station that didn't survive. There's no marker, no plaque. Just the way the wind pauses, ever so briefly, before moving on. Fringe tidbit. Archaeologists have found traces of destroyed yam stations along less used routes, charcoal, broken stirrups, tools left behind in panic. Some were likely lost to weather. Others, perhaps not. Local rebellions, border skirmishes, or simply the slow shrug of time. One station, uncovered in what's now Kazakhstan, had over a dozen identical bronze medallions buried beneath the threshold. No one knows why. Your thoughts are interrupted by something less poetic. A bee, large and determined, collides directly with your forehead. You yelp, flap your arms, and promptly veer Suspicion into a low bush. You both recover, dignity shredded. You ride on. The next yurt is tiny. A single tent, no paddock, no visible animals. The man inside is ancient, skin like saddle leather, eyes like two gleaming raisins in a storm of wrinkles. He doesn't speak much. Just grunts, gestures, and eventually hands you a flatbread so dry it qualifies as a building material. There's something comforting about his silence, though. Like he's part of the furniture of the steppe. Immovable. Older than the empire. Probably older than bread. Historians still argue whether these microstations were official or just informal nodes propped up by necessity. Some say they were registered, documented, and paid by the state. Others believe many were grassroots, locals who saw the need and joined the system, unpaid and mostly unacknowledged. Either way, they helped knit the vast landscape together, one fire pit and goat bladder canteen at a time. You don't linger. The sky is darkening now, and not from dusk. Thick clouds roll in from the north, clumping low and fast. You click your tongue, nudge Suspicion forward. A storm on the steppe isn't something you wait out casually, not unless you enjoy finding your boots frozen to your own shins. Still, it hits before you can reach the next post. Not snow, not yet. But rain. Cold and wild, slapping sideways like it's personally offended by your face. You tug your cloak tighter, grateful, again, for the hand-me-down waterproofing rubbed into its seams back at the capital. It smells faintly of sheep and victory. You take shelter under a rocky outcrop, Suspicion snorting behind you like a judge. Lightning flickers across the horizon, far enough not to feel threatening, but close enough to feel biblical. There's no one here but you. And the rain. And maybe the ghost of that station you passed earlier. You settle in. Breathe. Let your heartbeat slow to match the tempo of water on stone. Then you laugh. Just a little. Because despite the wet, and the cold, and the smell of suspicious soup still clinging to your sleeves, you're part of something. A line across the world. A whisper running from yurt to yurt. And in that moment, soaked and squinting into the dark, you feel, just briefly, like the wind knows your name. The storm passes like a guest who overstays their welcome. Loud, inconvenient, but thankfully gone before anyone starts crying over ruined carpets. You emerge from your rock shelter blinking, damp, and only slightly suspicious that your boots have developed personalities of their own during the downpour. Suspicion, your horse, shakes violently beside you, flinging water in every direction like a hairy weather system. The next leg of the journey stretches flatter than ever. You squint across a plain so wide you feel like you might fall off the edge of it. There are no trees. No boulders. Just grass, sky, and the occasional bird doing laps like it's got something to prove. Your next relay station is, mercifully, intact. 2 yurts, a corral, and smoke curling from a chimney flap. You're welcomed in with the kind of warmth that makes your eyebrows fog up. Someone hands you a cup of butter tea that tastes like it was strained through a goat, which, to be fair, it probably was. You drink it anyway. Inside, a woman sits at a low table copying a message onto a second scroll. She glances up briefly and nods before continuing, the brush gliding over the paper with soft, rhythmic strokes. You sit quietly, warming your toes by the stove. Mainstream historical fact: the Mongol relay stations didn't just pass along messages, they often created backups. Couriers were sometimes instructed to dictate their message at major waypoints to be copied and sent down alternate routes. Redundancy was everything in a world where a stray arrow, a storm, or a digestive emergency could erase weeks of effort. The woman seals the scroll with a strip of wax dyed green, likely indicating that it's a reply to a court physician. She tucks it into a pouch, then wordlessly gestures for a stable boy to prepare another courier. The system churns on. You stretch your legs before bed, wandering outside to where the stars have returned. They're brighter now, uncannily so. The sky here feels closer, like a ceiling you could reach if you just climbed a tall enough yurt. Fringe tidbit: some Yam couriers were trained in basic astronomy, not for grand navigation like seafarers, but to judge timing. Certain constellations helped indicate when night travel might be safest, and when sandstorms or high winds were likely. In one account, a courier delayed departure by half a day after watching Mars rise, out of order. A storm hit hours later. Coincidence? Probably. But don't tell him that. You return inside and sleep curled like a dog near the fire, cloak pulled high and dreams hovering just out of reach. Dawn brings a new twist. You're told you'll be riding with a partner. A young man, barely out of boyhood, grinning too much for someone about to spend 10 hours in the saddle. His name is something you immediately forget and then feel too awkward to ask again. So you call him Loud. Loud talks. A lot. About his uncle's ox, his cousin's wedding, the time he fell into a dry well and was stuck for 6 hours. You nod and, politely as the two of you ride side by side. Suspicion throws him one long look that says everything you're thinking. And yet, despite yourself, you learn something. Loud points out a clump of wind-blown grass with a dark fringe and says, "Yam root. Boil it, chew it, or just rub it on your forehead, fixes headaches and bad moods." Later, he tosses you a dried chunk of meat and says it's from a marmot his brother hunted last spring. You chew it slowly, trying not to taste the story behind it. Historians still argue whether dual courier routes were a frequent feature or just a contingency measure. Some records suggest riders were paired for dangerous or remote stretches, partly for protection, partly so one could carry on if the other fell. Other scholars believe these stories are exaggerated, and that solo riders were more typical. Regardless, the occasional double dispatch did exist, and when it did, companionship was part of the invisible infrastructure. You and Loud reach a ruined bridge before noon. The crossing is laughably unusable, planks missing, supports cracked, one sad rope dangling like a party streamer after an earthquake. There's a dry riverbed below, so you dismount and lead your horses down the rocky incline together. It's quiet under the banks. Cooler. Your boots slide a little, but you manage. Loud, still talking, misses a step and lands squarely on his backside. You stifle a laugh. Suspicion does not. On the far side, you remount and press on. The path curves uphill now, toward higher elevation. Pine trees begin to appear, thin and wind-warped, as if they grew here out of sheer stubbornness. The wind carries a chill that tugs at your cloak's edges like an overenthusiastic ghost. That night station is built into a cliff alcove. A cave-yurt hybrid, stone front with a canvas dome set into the rock. The fire inside is smoky, the air damp, but the food, barley stew with hints of garlic and dried fish, is surprisingly good. You and Loud fall asleep back to back, boots on, scroll pouch tucked between you like a baby chick. As you drift off, you hear wolves in the distance. Not close, but not far enough either. You wonder briefly how many messages they've eaten by accident over the years. You also wonder, strangely, and for the first time, what the message you're carrying actually says. But then you're asleep, snoring softly into your arm, suspicion snorting from outside like a guard who takes his job just seriously enough. Morning arrives not with sunlight, but with a shove. Loud is poking your ribs with the gentleness of a man trying to wake a bear. You grunt, roll over, and find your face firmly planted in a patch of damp wool that smells faintly of old onions. The fire's embers still glow. The stew pot is empty. Suspicion is already awake, ears twitching as he eyes the tree line like a disgruntled sentry. You stretch, pull on your boots, which have somehow frozen into the shape of hooves, and step outside. It's colder up here. You can feel it in your teeth. Your breath hangs in the air like a cartoon thought bubble. The road ahead snakes into a pinewood corridor, and the shadows here feel taller than you remember. Loud chatters beside you, undeterred by the silence you're giving him as a form of sleepy protest. Eventually, you cave and grunt a few responses. It's not that you don't enjoy his company. It's just, well, he's already had tea. You haven't. This leg of the yam is an old one. The path winds along ancient animal trails, marked here and there by carved stones bearing faded Mongol script, orders, warnings, or maybe just early graffiti. You trace your fingers along one, a turtle symbol, two arrows, and something that might be a frown. It's both mysterious and endearing, like a medieval post-it note. Mainstream historical fact: the Yam wasn't merely a network of speed, it was also a tapestry of local intelligence. These marker stones, wayposts, and coded etchings served as practical tools for navigation and communication. They warned of floods, safe grazing spots, or areas recently plagued by bandits. A courier who could read them had an edge. A courier who couldn't, well, you just hope you're not one of those. Suspicion whinnies nervously as you enter a narrow ravine. The wind shifts here. It whistles between stones like it's trying to hum a forgotten lullaby. And then, movement. Loud stops mid-sentence, one hand raised. A figure is slumped at the base of a tree ahead. You dismount, heart suddenly thudding like a too loud drum in a quiet room. The figure stirs. Not dead. Just deeply annoyed from the look on his face. Turns out he's another courier. His name is Senj, and he's twisted his ankle so badly it looks like it's trying to escape his boot. He's been waiting for help since yesterday, chewing pine needles and swearing at birds. Fringe tidbit: Mongol relay couriers carried small, specific aid items, horse liniment, splints, and even instructions for applying field compresses. Senj has done a half-decent job of wrapping his ankle, using a scarf and some carved wood. You offer him your dried meat stash. He offers you an insult in return that sounds affectionate. You and Loud confer quietly. You can't carry 3 riders. Not easily. But your scroll must keep moving. The system depends on it. This is when the strange little rule kicks in: if a courier is incapacitated but conscious, they can, technically, appoint a replacement to carry their charge. Loud steps forward, puffed up like a very confident goose, and offers to continue solo. Historians still argue whether such temporary deputizations were common practice or just exceptional measures recorded with more drama than accuracy. Some documents mention emergency appointments, while others suggest that messages were usually rerouted to the next post before any substitutions occurred. Either way, there's precedent. You hesitate. Loud isn't fast, but he's willing. And more importantly, he hasn't lost a scroll pouch in 3 weeks, which in courier time is basically perfect attendance. So you agree. You and Senj watch Loud disappear into the trees, scroll pouch slapping gently at his side, enthusiasm dangerously outweighing experience. Back at the station, you stay behind to wait for a rider to fetch Senj, or at least a horse that's not built like a grumpy brick. While you wait, you help the station master sort and burn old messages. Some are coded. Some are mundane. One simply reads, "Do not trust the milk merchant. He sings too much." Later, a traveler arrives with spare supplies and an extra mount. You leave Senj bundled in furs, content with tea and a growing pile of pine needle sculptures he's carving out of boredom. Your solo ride continues into a region called the Whispering Rocks, named for the way wind slides between jagged cliff faces to produce sounds that resemble conversation. You're skeptical, until you hear one. It sounds like someone sighing dramatically behind you. You whip around. Nothing but stones. You sigh back, just to be polite. Night falls faster in these parts. The rocks absorb the sun all day, then release a kind of ghostly warmth after dark. You make camp beside a flat boulder etched with horse symbols. Someone once slept here, maybe a century ago, and scratched their name into the stone. You add yours next to it. A little crooked, but sincere. As you eat the last of your marmot jerky, you think about the scroll pouch now bouncing along Loud's saddle. You wonder what it's doing, what it says. If it's even intact. You hope he's keeping it dry. You hope suspicion didn't bite him again. You hope the milk merchant has finally learned to keep his musical urges in check. Then the rocks whisper again. You pull your cloak tighter. Sleep eventually comes, dragging you under like a lazy river. In the dream, you're galloping. But not forward, sideways, across a map that won't sit still. Scrolls fall from the sky like feathers. Loud is in the distance yelling something about soup. Suspicion has wings. When you wake, it's already morning, and the journey presses on. You're not sure when you started talking to your horse like an old friend, but by now, suspicion is basically your therapist. You tell him everything. Your doubts about Loud. Your regrets about the marmot jerky. Your suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the Whispering Rocks were actually trying to give you directions. Suspicion, to his credit, listens silently. Occasionally, he snorts at what might be jokes. Or maybe it's gas. Either way, you feel heard. Today's ride is a long one. The sky above you is a washed-out blue, The kind that feels like someone left the celestial laundry on too long. Wind cuts across the plains like an invisible rake, combing the grass into furrows. Your fingers are stiff on the reins. Your tunic's collar chafes. You hum tunelessly, hoping it counts as morale. After a few hours, you spot movement ahead, a cluster of figures near what looks like a low wooden platform surrounded by tall flags. It's not a station, exactly, but a ceremonial rest stop. You remember hearing about these, special pavilions for imperial messengers transporting especially sensitive documents. Or, sometimes, scrolls that no one really wanted to get lost. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongol Empire used tiered levels of postal clearance, with different symbols or seals indicating urgency, secrecy, or even the importance of the messenger. Some couriers wore bone or jade tokens. Others carried wooden passes called gerage that identified their official status. Yours is simple, a bronze seal with the Khan's tamga stamped into the base. At the pavilion, you're welcomed by a tiny old man in fur-trimmed boots who seems delighted to have company. He offers you fermented mare's milk and some flatbread that could double as roof tiles. You chew dutifully. The milk tastes like determination. He asks about your route, your horse, and your favorite kind of bird. You answer politely. Then he tells you something strange. 3 nights ago, he says, a man rode through here in such a hurry he forgot to take his pouch. Just left it on the saddle when he changed horses. You blink. Loud. You describe him, talkative, big shoulders, terrible at sitting still. The old man nods sagely. Yes. That's the one. Said something about being on a heroic detour. A heroic detour? Fringe tidbit. There's a curious footnote in a 14th century Mongol travel diary describing the fool who returned a day later with 10 chickens and no scroll. Scholars have long debated whether it was metaphor or memory. You're starting to suspect it was loud. Still, the man assures you, the scroll was picked up by another relay rider soon after. Apparently, the postal system's built-in redundancy kicked in. When one courier strayed, another followed the route behind, catching dropped tasks like a wide receiver in a very bureaucratic game of tag. Historians still argue whether the Mongol system truly allowed for that kind of flexibility, or whether this was just a rare stroke of logistical luck. Some records hint at backup riders embedded in the network. Others say mistakes were punished harshly, with very little room for improvisation. Maybe the truth lies somewhere between, structure softened by necessity. After warming your hands by the pavilion's brazier, you press on. Your mind buzzes with questions. Did Loud deliberately abandon the pouch? Did he lose it? Trade it for chickens? The possibilities are endless, and increasingly ridiculous. As you ride, you start noticing the silence. Not peaceful silence, but the eerie kind that settles just before something happens. Suspicion stops. Ahead, 3 figures emerge from a copse of thin trees. They're travelers, or claim to be, but something feels off. One wears a half-kitten tunic. Another has a bow slung across his back, but no arrows. The third just grins too much. They wave you down. Ask about your route. Offer to help lighten your load. You respond with the same tone you'd use to tell a bear to get off your picnic. There's a pause. Then a movement. And suddenly you remember your training. Not the formal kind, but the unofficial lessons passed down between riders. Where to stash coins. How to fall off a horse and not break your spine. How to spot a highwayman pretending to be helpful. You spook suspicion with a light kick and pivot hard, sending both of you charging back down the path. Behind you, shouts. A flung stone misses your shoulder by inches. You don't look back again. It takes an hour to loop around the hills and rejoin the yam farther south. You only stop when you're sure you're not being followed. Even then, you keep suspicion trotting until he makes a noise that can only be described as, absolutely not, thank you. At the next station, a squat building tucked into a windbreak of junipers, you collapse onto a cot and relive the entire encounter aloud, mostly for suspicion's benefit. He eats an apple core and stares like he's writing an internal report. Later, over dinner, boiled roots and something claiming to be rabbit, you hear that Loud did indeed come through. He was fine. Chatty. Very proud of a large egg he'd found and refused to part with. You decide to stop worrying about him. For now. That night, as snow begins to dust the thatch roof above you, you dream again. This time, you're flying, not on wings, but on scrolls, each one carrying you higher. The wind sings. Suspicion is there too, wearing boots for some reason. The fire crackles low. The stationmaster snores gently from the other cot. And the Empire's breath, ever moving, stirs again through the yam. The wind hasn't stopped howling since dawn. It snakes down from the mountains, scooping up snow and insults from the peaks and flinging them across the steppe like an over-caffeinated sky god. You, naturally, are right in the middle of it, hunched low on suspicion's back, tunic cinched so tight it feels like you're being hugged by a very cold snake. But that's postal life in the Mongol Empire. Comfort is for the people receiving the scrolls, not the ones delivering them. Today's path bends westward along a mountain pass, one of the more treacherous threads in the Yam's vast, tangled web. It was once a caravan trail for silk traders, and before that, a seasonal route for migrating herders. The rocks here remember everything. You hear it in the wind, which whistles like it's trying to recite names. Mainstream historical fact: the Mongol postal routes were built not only for speed but for redundancy. Multiple roads often led to the same destination, allowing couriers to reroute in case of bad weather, attacks, or landslides. A clever system, provided you could read the signs. And we're not talking about wooden arrows or friendly maps. We're talking stacked stones, carved tree trunks, even patterns in animal dung that indicated safe terrain. You pause at a ridge. Below you, the land falls away into a frozen basin, rimmed with pine. You see a distant fire, probably a watchpost or a hunting camp. Or, given your luck, a very enthusiastic barbecue. The descent is slippery. Suspicion takes it slow, picking his way like a cautious uncle on an icy sidewalk. Your knees ache. You start talking again, mostly to stay sane. You name the trees. That gnarled one is General Cranky. The bent-over one is Lady Hunch. The squirrel is Steve. Fringe tidbit: some yam riders, particularly those in the far north, developed a practice of singing to their horses, not for entertainment, but as a kind of shared compass. Certain melodies were associated with regions or trail segments. Lose the tune, and you'd lost your way. You try it now, humming a low, meandering tune you once heard from an older courier. Suspicion's ears twitch. Either he remembers it, or you've triggered a horse-based panic reflex. Either way, you feel a little less alone. Halfway down the ridge, you spot it, another station. This one's been partially buried by snowdrifts, with only the carved post and a bit of thatch poking out. A man in layered furs waves you in. He looks like a snowman who's halfway through molting. Inside, it's smoky, warm, and blessedly dry. There are two other couriers here, one sleeping, boots off and snoring like a bear, and the other poking at a pot of something stew-adjacent. They glance up, nod in that quiet, exhausted way couriers do. No fanfare. No need. You strip off your outer cloak and sit by the brazier. Your scroll tube is still strapped beneath your tunic, warmed by your own body heat, because that's the best way to prevent cracking. You check it once. Still sealed. Still safe. Still vital. The stew courier offers you a bowl. You thank her. It's mostly root vegetables and what might be goat, but after a day in the saddle, it tastes like nobility. You talk for a while, about road conditions, wild dogs, the debate over whether garlic helps with frostbite. Apparently, it doesn't, but it does keep your tentmates at a respectful distance. Then someone brings up the fire you saw earlier. That's not a watchpost, one says. That's the embassy caravan. Persian delegation heading to Karakorum. Interesting. Historians still argue whether foreign diplomats truly use the yam with the same privileges as imperial couriers. Some records suggest that the Khan's generosity extended even to rivals and emissaries, offering them way stations, horses, and protection. Others claim it was a display of dominance. See how fast our messages travel. Good luck keeping up. Regardless, if that fire belongs to an embassy, it means you're close to one of the primary arterial routes, the real lifelines of the Mongol communication system. Scrolls delivered along this spine could change fates, start or stop wars, even determine who got invited to royal weddings. Or who got politely conquered. You rest for a while, then trade horses. Your next mount is a smaller mare with one white ear and an expression that suggests she's only doing this because she lost a bet. You name her Resignation. Outside, the wind has finally dipped below angry banshee levels. You ride out again, heading toward the caravan's signal fire. When you reach it, the embassy is already packing up, heavily bundled figures speaking Persian, Mongolian, a bit of Chinese. A pair of guards gives you the side-eye until you flash your seal. Then one nods and offers you roasted chestnuts. You accept. You're not a fool. One of the translators, a man with a braided beard and impeccable boots, asks where you're headed. You name the station. He chuckles and says they'll likely beat you there. You raise an eyebrow. Even with that cart? He pats the cart. It's got wheels greased with lamb fat and we bribed the gods of traffic. Fair enough. You ride on, chestnuts in one hand, reins in the other, wondering what news the Persians are carrying. A peace offering? Trade reports? A complaint about the last guy who spilled kumis on their diplomat? You'll never know. But it doesn't matter. Your job isn't to read the scroll. It's to carry it. Like every courier before you, you're part of something bigger, an invisible thread stitching together a continent. Night falls again. You find a cluster of trees and set up a lean-to. Suspicion, or rather, resignation, nuzzles the snow for grass. You wrap your cloak tighter, chew the last of your chestnuts, and listen to the wind whisper old stories down from the peaks. The yam rolls on. And so do you. Sleep comes in odd shapes out here, curled against your scroll tube like it might whisper secrets, or slumped over your saddle like a dramatic poet mid-stanza. You wake to frost on your eyelashes and a marmot nibbling something that used to be your glove. The stars are still out, but there's a hint of dawn spreading over the east, pale and peach-colored like someone dropped a spoonful of yogurt in the sky. You stretch, pop your joints like an old floorboard, and resecure the scroll tube under your cloak. It's warmer now. Either the wind has died or your nerves are too fried to notice. Resignation looks about the same as you feel, ready to move but not exactly thrilled about it. Today's ride takes you into more populated territory, closer to a town that straddles a crucial junction in the YAM network. This is where messages must be logged, horses traded, and routes recalibrated. You'd think it would be more glamorous, like some kind of postmaster's palace. But no, it's more like a muddy outpost with a ledger the size of a tombstone and someone yelling about how the goats keep eating the road markers. Mainstream historical fact. The Mongol postal system didn't just use yurts and riders, it also incorporated formal record-keeping posts where dispatches were registered, archived, and sometimes translated into other languages. Clerks, known as batikchi, kept meticulous records, often writing in multiple scripts, such as Uyghur, Chinese, or Persian. This wasn't just about logistics, it was empire management at its finest. You arrive mid-morning. The outpost smells like boiling mutton, wet earth, and ink. A clerk in a quilted robe waves you over, squinting like he's already decided your paperwork is a personal attack. You dismount, stretch your back like an accordion, and hand over your courier seal. He studies it, nods, then hands you a cup of hot sour milk tea. It tastes like curdled regret but warms your insides. You give your name, your last station, and show the seal on the scroll tube. He copies it all down with a brush the width of a pigeon feather. Fringe tidbit. Some YAM clerks were required to take oaths of silence regarding the contents or destinations of scrolls, even though most of them never opened one. Rumor has it a few were actually blind, chosen for their integrity and ability to memorize complex travel routes using touch and smell alone. You consider that as he stamps your travel log with something red and sticky. You're headed to the river crossing next, he says. There's flooding, so they've diverted the usual ferry. You'll have to take the back ridge. Of course you will. You sigh and collect your saddlebag, glancing at Resignation, who gives you a look that says, again. You leave town in a trickle of hooves and boot squelch, riding west into the wetlands. The air is heavy with the smell of thawing reeds. Cranes stalk the shallows. Somewhere, someone is yelling at a duck, but you don't stop to investigate. As you approach the river crossing, the bridge is, unsurprisingly, missing. Not collapsed, just gone. Floating downstream like a lazy canoe. You find a boy with a goat and ask about the detour. He points up the hill. Take the ridge path. But don't stop at the shrine, yeah. Why not? Ghosts. Of course. Historians still argue whether Mongol couriers had superstitions specific to certain routes or regions. While there's no official doctrine in the records, oral traditions suggest many riders avoided particular trees, refused to whistle on foggy days, or carried amulets stitched from the manes of black stallions to ward off night spirits. You, for one, aren't taking chances. You hum a little anti-ghost ditty and keep moving. The ridge path is steep but manageable. You ride through a corridor of silver birch, the kind that peel like ancient parchment. A shrine appears up ahead, just a small cairn with prayer flags, faded and whispering in the breeze. You nod respectfully, toss a pebble onto the pile, and mutter something that could be mistaken for a blessing or indigestion. Either way, the ghost doesn't show. From the top of the ridge, you spot your next destination, a larger yurt station flanked by 4 standing poles with carved wolves at their tops. The design tells you this station deals with both official messages and border alerts. You make your way down the hill, hooves clicking on cold stone, the wind suddenly quieter here, more curious than cruel. Inside the station, it's bustling. Couriers come and go, a Persian envoy haggles over rice, and someone's attempting to boil tea using a helmet. You report in, trade Resignation for a compact gray gelding who seems disturbingly chipper, and refill your pouch with dried fish and salted barley. One of the station keepers pulls you aside. There's a second dispatch headed the same way as yours, she says. Needs a trusted courier. You look at her. Double scroll duty. Double rations, she says. Tempting. You agree and are handed another sealed tube, wrapped in blue silk. It's lighter than yours, but clearly high priority. You tuck it next to the first and mount up. Your new horse, who you dub Optimism, trots like he's auditioning for a parade. You hang on and let him lead. The final leg of the day takes you into rolling plains brushed gold with late grass. Herds of sheep in the distance, and a few wild horses flicking their tails in disdain. Somewhere in that soft openness, you feel the breadth of the empire pressing gently on your shoulders, not in a crushing way, but like a vast coat of mail made of obligations and dust. You think about the other couriers. About the scribes who sealed the scrolls, the generals who'll read them, the whispering shrine you passed, and even the marmot who nibbled your glove. All of it part of the same engine. You don't know what's in either scroll. Maybe you never will. But they matter. Enough that someone sent you hundreds of miles through ice and swamp and bureaucracy to carry them. And that's enough. The sun dips low again, painting the sky in quiet oranges. You lean into the saddle and let Optimism carry you to the next flicker of firelight on the horizon. The wind tonight is less of a menace and more of a lullaby, humming across the grasslands in slow, even breaths. Optimism trots with the smug rhythm of a horse who's never known a true winter, and you, bundled up in a scratchy wool cloak that smells faintly of goat and ink, let yourself settle into a quiet trance. The two scroll tubes, one thick and cracked, the other slim and wrapped in blue silk, bounce lightly at your side like sleepy companions. The next yurt station rises up just as darkness settles, its domed roof haloed by the glow of lanterns hung from the surrounding fence. The outline is familiar now. Low entrance, curved smoke hole at the top, ropes that seem to whisper as they sway in the breeze. A few other riders are already inside. One sharp-featured woman is picking burrs from her socks. Another is asleep upright, like a horse trained in bad decisions. You duck into the yurt, and the smell hits you first: roasted onions, dried mutton, damp wool, and the ever-present scent of something fermenting in the corner. You blink in the orange light and pull off your gloves with the grace of someone who no longer has full control of their fingers. Mainstream historical fact: yurt stations along the Yam weren't just sleeping quarters, they were vital hubs of intelligence exchange, stocked with spare horses, food, scribes, and basic medical supplies. Some larger ones even had resident astrologers or weather watchers to advise couriers on the safest travel windows. They functioned like Empire-sponsored pit stops, offering both comfort and control. You show your scroll tubes, receive nods of approval from the station keeper, and are handed a warm compress for your aching knees. One of the resident scribes offers you a game of ankle bones, a gambling pastime using knuckle bones, traditionally from sheep or goats. You decline, mostly because the last time you played, you accidentally bet your saddle. Instead, you sip a cup of tea that tastes vaguely like pickled hay and listen to the other couriers swap war stories. One got chased by a goose the size of a child, another swears she rode through a dust devil and came out 10 years older. Fringe tidbit: some yurt stations were rumored to be built on sacred sites and were thought to be protected by ancestral spirits. Superstitious couriers would leave offerings at the threshold, tufts of horsehair, smooth stones, or even snippets of poetry, hoping to ensure a dreamless sleep and a pothole-free trail. You mumble a half-prayer to the tea leaves and tuck yourself into the sleeping pile. Bodies shift, someone mutters in their sleep, and the fire crackles softly like it's trying not to wake the yurt. You drift off to the sound of horses stomping just outside, their silhouettes flickering against the felt walls. Morning comes with the rude enthusiasm of a rooster who doesn't understand boundaries. You rise, bleary-eyed and bendy-limbed, and fumble through your morning routine, boots on, cloak around, scroll secured. Optimism is fed and ready, tossing his mane like he just discovered ego. You ask for the road ahead and are told it passes through a narrow ravine. Keep to the left path, the station keeper warns. The right side's full of snow leopards. Right. Left good. Right bad. Got it. The ravine lives up to its name. It hugs your shoulders like a hallway built by stingy architects. The cliffs rise steeply on either side, streaked with frost and pine roots. Your breath clouds in the air like tiny puffs of concern. Every so often, you think you hear a hiss of snow sliding somewhere above, but nothing falls. Yeah. Historians still argue whether the Mongols intentionally carved new trails through difficult terrain to optimize the Yam routes, or whether they simply used existing trade and nomadic paths. Archaeological evidence shows both possibilities, with certain ravines like this one featuring ancient markers likely placed to guide couriers during winter months: stacked stones, bone totems, even bits of dyed wool tied to tree branches. You pass one such marker, a horse skull propped on a stake, its teeth eerily clean. You nod respectfully, because that's just good manners in this job. The ravine opens into a high plain, snow-dusted and silent. You pause here to rest, unbuckle your saddlebag, and fish out a handful of barley crackers. The wind hums. Optimism stands oddly still, ears tilted forward. Then you hear it, hoofbeats. Not behind, not ahead, but to your right. You turn just in time to see another courier approach, cloaked in red, a pale scarf wrapped around their face. They nod in greeting but don't stop. Just enough eye contact to acknowledge a fellow traveler on this strange, bureaucratic pilgrimage. It's comforting, in a weird, silent movie sort of way. Back in the saddle, you continue toward your final delivery post. It's marked by a tall pole with copper bells tied near the top, another signal that you're close to an imperial relay point. The bells jingle in the wind like polite applause. You approach, dismount, and hand off the first scroll, the blue-wrapped one, to a senior clerk wearing gloves far too clean to be trusted. He tucks it into a carved case without a word. The second scroll, your original delivery, is noted and signed for in a language you don't read. You're handed a receipt you will definitely lose within the next 24 hours. The clerk nods, then gestures to a nearby platform where you can rest and warm up. The platform is raised, built from dry pine, and there's already a pot of broth bubbling nearby. You sit, sipping from a shallow bowl, watching the sun drop behind the far hills like a curtain closing on a stage. You've done it. Scrolls delivered. Horses not dead. Ghosts unbothered. You lean back, cloak pulled tight, and stare up at the darkening sky. Another courier arrives. She's young, looks terrified. She clutches a scroll tube like it's a snake trying to bite her. You give her a nod, the universal, "Yep, been there" face. She nods back, takes the broth, sits beside you. This moment, this quiet recognition between two dust-covered strangers under a sky big enough to swallow an empire, is the heart of the yam. You don't know each other's names, but you both know the roads, the wolves, the cracked leather of two tight saddles. That's enough. The bells jingle again, and someone lights a fire inside the station yurt. Shadows stretch long across the platform. You settle in, one more figure among many, held gently in the endless rhythm of a system built for motion, and for moments just like this, you wake to the sound of snoring, loud and enthusiastic, from somewhere deeper inside the yurt. The floor is warm beneath you, a slab of packed earth softened by layers of wool, rugs, and flattened bodies in varying states of sleep. You blink slowly, momentarily unsure which station this is, or which scrolls you've already delivered. Your legs are stiff, and your back has apparently decided that the idea of rest is just a cruel myth. You groan, stretch, and roll over, knocking into a nearby courier who grumbles something in a dialect you don't recognize. You whisper an apology and begin the delicate operation of escaping the tangle of cloaks and limbs without waking half the Mongol Empire. You step outside to find Optimism still tied near the fence, nibbling at a frozen apple core someone left in the snow. The sky is a pale silver now, just before sunrise, and your breath hangs in soft curls. You run your hand over Optimism's side, feel the tension there. He's ready to move again, despite everything. Mainstream historical fact: the Mongol yam system operated with astonishing regularity. Even during winter, couriers were expected to maintain their schedules. Horses were rotated with such efficiency that delays were minimal, and messages could travel from Karakorum to the Caspian Sea in just a matter of days. Many routes remained active year-round, with temporary yurts added in severe weather regions to keep messengers alive and schedules intact. Your next route veers toward a hilly region, notorious among riders for its aggressive hospitality. Local herders are friendly but very curious, and they've been known to invite couriers into their homes with alarming insistence, often resulting in unintentional overnight stays, impromptu wrestling matches, or, in one case, an accidental engagement. You promise yourself that this time, you'll just wave politely and keep riding. Famous last words. You make it about 3 hills in before you spot smoke curling from a small camp and a man waving a ladle like a semaphore flag. His goats are practically forming a picket line across the road. Avoiding him would require navigating through some extremely disapproving-looking bushes. You slow down. He grins. Soup. You dismount. Of course you do. It's not every day someone yells soup at you with such conviction. Fringe tidbit: in many steppe cultures, offering food to a traveler, especially broth or tea, was more than just kindness. It was a minor ritual of good fortune, meant to ensure both the guest and the host would be watched over by the spirits of the land. Refusing it wasn't rude per se, but it was unlucky. And on a road where wolves outnumber welcome mats, nobody risks bad luck. So you sit, sip a surprisingly garlicky stew, and answer a few questions about the imperial seal on your scroll tube. Are the scrolls made from paper or gold? Do you meet the Great Khan? Is that your real horse name? You make polite noises and steer the conversation back toward, "Thanks for the soup," and "I really must be going." Eventually, they let you leave, but not before tying a red ribbon around your scroll for protection against ink demons. Sure. Why not? Back on the road, optimism picks up speed, perhaps trying to outrun the social interaction. You let the wind sting your cheeks awake and follow the ribbon markers up the next ridge. Historians still argue whether such local interactions slowed or strengthened the YAM system. On the one hand, extended layovers and distractions could disrupt the tight schedules couriers were meant to keep. On the other hand, these regional connections, whether through shared meals, small gifts, or even gossip, created a softer, more human layer of intelligence gathering that the Mongol Empire likely found useful. After all, when everyone's willing to share soup and secrets, you learn a lot about your empire. The land flattens again. In the distance, you see smoke rising from another relay station, your final stop before turning back toward Karakoram. It feels strange to be so close to the edge of your route. Part of you wants to keep going, to see how far the roads stretch. The other part is already fantasizing about a bath. You arrive at the yurt, greeted by a boy barely older than 12, holding a tally board. He checks off your delivery with exaggerated care, squinting at each scroll as though it might explode. Then he hands you a cup of fermented mare's milk and nods solemnly. For your bones. You take a sip. It tastes like yogurt with commitment issues. Inside, the relay station is buzzing with activity. A new batch of scrolls has just arrived, and a harried-looking station keeper is shouting at someone in a fur hat about an overdue shipment of lamp oil. You're waved over and handed a fresh satchel, 3 scrolls this time, tightly bound and marked with green thread. You tuck them carefully into your pouch and check the wax seals. And then, miracle of miracles, you're told you can rest here for the night before starting your return journey. A fire is already crackling, and someone is roasting what might be a turnip. You don't ask too many questions anymore. You settle down near the edge of the yurt, close enough to the wall to feel the wind push through the seams, but far enough from the fire not to overheat. You lie back, scroll secured, boots off, and stare at the roof lattice above. Someone begins to hum. Someone else sneezes. The world narrows to warmth, rhythm, and the promise of rest. It's funny, this life of motion, of never staying long, of windswept roads and odd snacks in strangers' camps. It wears on you. But it also shapes you. You're no longer just a courier. You're a quiet link in the great, ridiculous, sprawling machine that is the Mongol Empire. And in the hush of the yurt, surrounded by strangers who are also not so strange anymore, you feel something very close to peace. The next morning arrives not with birdsong or golden rays of light, but with a disgruntled goat barging its head under the flap of the yurt, bleating like it's collecting taxes. You wake to find your left foot suspiciously damp, and someone has accidentally used your cloak as a pillow. Again. You blink blearily at the curved roof, then roll upright and begin the familiar ritual of gathering your gear. Satchel, check. Scrolls, check. Boots, cold, but intact. Optimism, also cold, also intact, and chewing contemplatively on a piece of rope. You bid farewell to the station keeper, who insists on tying another protective charm to your bridle, a small carved bead meant to ward off flatulence in horses. You sincerely hope it works. Optimism has been expressive lately. Mainstream historical fact, the return routes in the YAM system were just as carefully monitored as the outgoing ones. Couriers were often expected to bring back fresh intelligence, receipts of delivery, or items requested by the central court. It wasn't simply a ride back to base, it was another leg of responsibility, packed with instructions, lists, and sometimes a pigeon in a basket. The wind picks up as you crest the first rise on the journey home. This leg of the trip is slightly longer but has fewer stops, designed for speed. You adjust your seat, settle into the rhythm of optimism's gait, and begin to count your breaths, 8 in, 4 held, 7 out. It's an old courier trick, something between a meditation and a distraction from saddle sores. Ahead, the landscape stretches out like a crumpled wool blanket, gentle slopes, tufts of dry grass, and the occasional squat silhouette of a watchpost or wayfinding cairn. These little rock towers often double as snack stashes, if you know where to look. You don't stop to investigate, but you do note the extra white stone on top of one, an informal signal used by some couriers to warn of strong headwinds. Sure enough, within minutes, you're leaning forward into a biting gust that tastes faintly of copper and distance. Fringe tidbit, some messengers would sing into the wind, not for morale, but to test how far their voice carried. It was an old trick used by herders and scouts, believed to indicate changes in air pressure and, superstitiously, to alert road spirits to a traveler's presence. You try it once, humming a few bars of a lullaby you only half remember, and you swear the wind shifts just slightly in response. A shadow passes overhead. You glance up, half expecting some omen-bearing eagle, but it's just a messenger pigeon banking toward the west. You wonder what secrets it carries. Military orders? Gossip about the Khan's latest banquet? A stern reminder to rotate your socks? Historians still argue whether the yam's reliance on human couriers over pigeons was one of efficiency or control. While birds were faster over short distances, they lacked the flexibility of a trained rider who could carry multiple messages, adapt to changing routes, and, importantly, be held accountable for lost scrolls. You can't exactly scold a pigeon. Midday comes with a kind of stillness you've learned to respect. The sun hangs low, but bright, and the wind dies into a soft whisper. You stop to water optimism near a half-frozen stream, digging a shallow hole to access the trickle beneath the surface. Your fingers go numb almost instantly. Winter has teeth here, and they're sharpening. You nibble on a strip of dried yak meat, so tough it nearly takes a tooth with it. A few strips are wrapped in paper notes, more talismans, this time against thieves. Honestly, at this point, your belongings probably rattle with all the charms, beads, and knots meant to protect you from bad luck. Maybe they work. You haven't been eaten by wolves yet. By late afternoon, you spot smoke from a distant village. You don't stop. This stretch isn't part of your official route, but you give the place a nod in passing. Someone spots you and waves a wool mitten. You wave back. The road grows rougher. One of the old wooden bridges you usually cross is missing a support beam, washed away by the early thaw. You hesitate, then urge optimism to try the shallow crossing below instead. The water is only ankle deep but bone-chilling, and you both emerge with dripping legs and a shared expression of regret. As dusk arrives, you find your final overnight post, just a lean-to and a circle of stones, but blessedly dry. You unroll your blanket, feed optimism a mash of oats and warm water, and huddle by a quickly sparked fire. You hold the scroll tube in your lap, running your fingers over its worn ridges. One day, this little cylinder might carry news of a new ruler, or a declaration of peace, or just more orders about millet grain distribution. Doesn't matter. It's important because someone, somewhere, will listen. Sleep comes slowly, wrapping around you like the smoky wool of your cloak. In your half-dreaming state, you imagine yourself not just as a courier, but as one of the threads binding this sprawling empire together, a single line in the great living map of history. The fire pops softly. Outside, the wind shifts again, bringing with it the scent of cedar smoke from far-off yurts. And above, the sky is a velvet dome, scattered with stars that have watched generations of riders just like you, tracing the same roads, facing the same doubts, and whispering the same silent wish for safe passage home. You rest now, the fire nothing but a ring of embers, your breath slow, quiet, even. The scroll tube lies beside you, forgotten for the moment, its wax seal catching the faintest gleam from the moon overhead. Above, stars drift like slow lanterns across the ink-dark sky, indifferent but oddly comforting. The yurt is behind you, the road is behind you, and the endless weight of the saddle has melted from your shoulders. Your legs no longer ache. The wind has softened into a lullaby, brushing past you with all the urgency of a passing thought. You are still. Out there, across the sleeping empire, other couriers are settling down just like you. Some in yurts, others in lean-tos, a few under nothing but sky. They, too, have crossed rivers, outpaced storms, dodged marmots, and whispered jokes to their horses. The yam rolls on, silent and invisible, connecting camp to court, whispering history into motion. You've done your part. You rode, you endured, you delivered. Tonight, that is enough. So now, as the final breeze stirs the grass and the fire sighs its last, you close your eyes. Let the road fade behind you. Let the scrolls sleep inside their tubes. Let the saddle rest against the yurt wall. You've earned this stillness, this small quiet place at the end of a very long journey. No one needs anything from you now. You are safe. You are warm. You are where you're supposed to be. And the world, impossibly wide though it is, can wait until morning. Sleep well, messenger.